And then Susan, you can popcorn this out to somebody else.
Okay. Well, first I want to thank the Philadelphia Bar Foundation and the Equal Justice Center for inviting us to have a community conversation with you folks about our I guess our own kind of unique local portals, but then some of the challenges that we face. So I'm Susan Che. I'm the executive director of Ohio Legal Help, and I am one of two attorneys on our staff. So that's a little bit different from probably the other structures that you're going to hear about today. We're also an independent nonprofit. So we are separate and apart. So we um, are not part of maybe legal aid state support or maybe part of another justice organization. Um, but we are a just regular, normal nonprofit 501c3. So let me tell you a little bit about us and first our platform. So our platform is ohiolegalhelp.org, and we are the statewide portal for the state of Ohio. And we say we guide folks, we inform them with our good legal information and good forms, and then we connect them to the local resource that's actually tailored to them based upon their legal issue and where they are geographically on their in the state. And we work on a little bit of a hub and spoke model, meaning that if someone comes to what we call a topic page, maybe it's divorce, let's say it's without kids, they will find all the legal information for that process on that page. But in addition, they will see a drawer, if you will, that opens that they can see all the legal help that's available for them, whether it's free or the local bar association. And in addition, they will have all the court forms, including the poverty affidavit, which is bundled as part of this for the divorce without kids filing in Ohio. And then finally, the other resource that we provide is essentially connection to the right local court for that issue, the local bar association, legal aid dependent on the income information that they provided to us, and then also whether or not the court has a self-help center where they can go, where they can get some filing assistance. So that's our basic platform. And then in addition to that, we run other platforms in the state. So we run a asynchronous virtual pro bono hub where a pro bono attorney can work with a pro bono client to complete a document together. And then currently we run 3 virtual court self-help centers that are full service courts in a phone, where essentially someone can complete pretty much their divorce process, including post decree, essentially on a mobile first platform. So that's kind of what we did. Now, in terms of how we started, we're actually probably the newest of the group. We launched in late 2019. We came out as a task force recommendation from the Ohio Supreme Court's task force on access to justice. And we did our design through something called community-led design. So a very diverse group of stakeholders in the state that came together to design a portal. I'm going to actually turn it over because I think we'll have some questions about our community-led design and how you reach consensus when no one can agree on anything. So, but I can talk to that later. I'm going to throw it to Terry.
Thanks, Susan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Terry Rouse. I'm the Executive Director at Illinois Legal Aid Online. We call ourselves ILEO. Our statewide website is illinoislegalaid.org. We've been around for almost 25 years. And so our organization, like Susan's, is an independent nonprofit. We're not attached to a direct service legal aid program. And we've always been that way, which makes us kind of unique. And the thing that still amazes me even to this day is that when ILEO was formed, and we were formed by a collaboration of legal foundations and legal aid organizations who said, hey, look at this thing called the internet. Do you think maybe this might help us with access to justice? And so this was back in 2001. Only 56% of American adults were even using the internet. And this was the same year that LegalZoom and Wikipedia were formed. And so thinking back to that, and I was not there at that time, I cannot take credit for it, but I think, wow, that was a really big risk to take at the time. We've always been a web-based resource, digital-based resource, I would say. And so so we've been around for a long time. We effectively we do two things. We connect people to the best available legal help. We do that through a tool called Get Legal Help. It's a triage, intake, and referral system. And I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to tell you all about that later. And then the other thing we do, like all of the other presenters, we educate people on their legal rights, and we provide them with free tools to be able to assert those rights. And we cover over 600 legal issues, civil legal issues, and focus on those most impacting lower income people in Illinois. Our website has very good search engine optimization, or SEO, and so we're widely used, not just in Illinois, but we get national traffic, especially on this. We have a mirrored site in Spanish. And so we're used by about 15% of the Illinois population on a given year. That comes out to 2.5, a little more million people a year. So on any given day, we have about 7,000, 8,000 people using the site. And one other thing I will say is that about half of the people who come to use the virtual hub come after business hours or on weekends. So they're about 50%, right? Which I think is a huge bump to access to justice, right? And with that, I will turn it over to Nora.
Thanks, Terry. Hi, I'm Nora Ryan. I'm the director of Michigan Legal Help. We are similar to Aleo. We have a self-help website and a self-led portal. We've been around since 2012. We have a staff of about 13 people, about 6 attorneys, myself included, 4 content attorneys, and then we have an attorney dedicated to our document assembly tools. We are not an independent nonprofit. We're actually a program housed within a larger organization that's a sister organization to our legal services office, but it's non-LSC funded. So it houses all of our programs that do impact litigation and serve client populations that can't be served by legal aid. Similar to Aleo, we have kind of our 2 or maybe 3 main the 2 or 3 main things that we do through the website are we have our own library of resources. So we have we've got Know Your Rights articles that kind of focus on a particular legal topic. We have self-led interviews where our staff attorneys write questions that lead people through information that then populates a court form or another legal document. And then we also have step-by-step instructions that break down the procedural rules, the court rules, so people know once they get their court form completed or their letter completed or their will completed, the next steps they have to take in order to file, serve, in order to kind of go through the course of their case. We are also pretty well utilized through the state of Michigan. We've got about 2 million unique users per year, 3 million sessions per year, and kind of a tool that I think I'll focus on is our Guide to Legal Help. That's our triage system. And so that is also a self-led system where people answer questions about their county, their income, whether they're currently homeless or experiencing domestic violence, or if they're a veteran, other factors that could impact qualification for legal services. And then we ask a series of kind of logic-led questions about their legal issue, starting with, is it a housing issue? If it is, is it eviction? If it's eviction, the basis of the eviction, the procedural posture, kind of drilling down to as much detail as possible. And then from that, creating a curated list of resources for that person, including resources on our website that could be helpful, tools, articles, linking them to legal aid if they qualify based on case type and income. Most of our legal aid organizations use online intake, so we can direct them straight to the online intake through the guide. We list other community resources that could be helpful, homelessness services, depending on what they indicated through the interview, kind of other wraparound services. If they have a self-help center in their county, provide them contact information for that. Their dispute resolution center. We try to have it as much as a one-stop shop for people so that they can get contact information for their court, for mediation, other legal services, community services. We have a link to a clinic calendar. So if there are legal aid is providing community outreach or clinics, they can get connected to that. We have a text-based system that provides kind of behavioral nudges, but also, connecting people to additional resources so people can sign up for that texting system through that guide to legal help. And then we also provide information on other benefits that people may qualify for based on the way that they answered their triage tool. If they indicated they had a certain income and family size, but didn't indicate they received certain benefits, we'd provide information there on that. With that, people can print that, email that, be able to keep that curated list so they can return to it as they need to. In addition to that website, we run 2 different programs that are trying to help reach people and help them better be able to utilize the resources on Michigan Legal Help. So like Susan in Ohio, we provide training and technical assistance to self-help centers across the state. Those are primarily in libraries and courts, where we provide training for staff there to help people use the Michigan Legal Help website. We've got over 60 locations in 32 counties across the state. And we also recently launched a community justice partner program that is trying to get to people more upstream and training kind of social service providers, people who are otherwise serving their community on non-legal issues, and helping to train them, flag when somebody they're working with might be experiencing a legal issue but may not be identifying it as such, and helping to connect them to appropriate legal resources. And then I'll pass it to Jay.
Awesome. Thank you, Nora. And thank you everyone for having us. It's a real honor to be on this panel with these other great panelists. But my name is Jay Singleton, and I'm the program manager at Legal Services State Support in Minnesota. Our office was originally created back in the 80s, actually, with the goal of increasing coordination and reducing duplication across the different legal aid organizations in Minnesota. And over time, we've continued that mission, but we have veered more and more towards using technology to fulfill that mission. So just organizationally, we're housed within, similar to Nora in Michigan, we're housed within a non-LSC organization in Minnesota that's the sister agency to an LSC organization. We've had a couple of different legal aid homes throughout our history, but that's where we are now. And we really view ourselves as working with both those traditional regional legal aid organizations, but also within the broader access to justice system in Minnesota. So our office does a variety of things, but I'm going to focus on our work on our website, lawhelpmn.org, which is our Minnesota virtual hub. So that website has been around, I think, similarly to Terry's in Illinois. I think the website was first created in the early 2000s. But we did a big redesign in 2019, which is the version of the site that I'll be referencing most, because it is a pretty different website at this point. So similar to the other websites, I won't get into this too much, but we have kind of 2 main features of the site. One is that self-help information to help people understand and take action on their legal issues on their own or with limited assistance. Our website is available in Spanish, Hmong, and Somali. And then the second part of our website is a database of free and low-cost legal services in Minnesota. So we include both those traditional legal aid services as well as clinics. We also include other places where you can work with a human to get additional assistance, even if it might not be legal advice. So we include law libraries and our courts' great self-help centers. in that list, as well as some of our low bono referral projects if people don't qualify for legal aid. So like I said, we underwent a really big redesign that we launched in 2019. And that redesign was really spurred on by two big reports that came out 2 years previous in 2017. One was the Justice for All Strategic Plan, which was a process that many states underwent to work with a wide variety of stakeholders and figure out, like, what can we do within our specific situation in our state to really provide more access at all income levels to everyone, that really universal design principle, I think. And one of the things that came out of that plan for Minnesota was to focus on redesigning law help and making sure that the content, especially the content about the services that were available, were more streamlined and accurate and more specific, because a lot of our listings were pretty general before that. The second big report that came out in 2017 that influenced our redesign was called, we call it the Toll Report because it was written by John Toll, but the long title is An Analysis of the Civil Legal Aid Intake Infrastructure in Minnesota, Final Report. That was commissioned by Minnesota's state Supreme Court to look at what does it look like when somebody tries to get legal assistance in Minnesota. And so it involved surveys, focus groups, a lot of data analysis. And one of the key findings was that our system was experiencing a lot of what the report termed bounce. So somebody would call legal aid organization A, that organization couldn't help. And so they would try to refer them to another organization, which wouldn't be able to help. And then the referrals would go on and on. So it was both a matter of the public not having accurate information about what services were out there, and also legal aid staff not knowing what their partner agencies were able to help with. So as a part of that law help redesign, we really focused on that legal services database. So we created this great database, which we call the Legal Organizations Online Network, which we refer to as Loon, which is the Minnesota state bird, and leads to a lot of fun logo designs. So that's both a publicly available database through our Law Help MN, and then there's also a password protected version of that legal aid partners can sign into to both view more detailed information about what services are provided by other organizations and update their information. I can talk about the updating process and many of the challenges related to that more later on, but the goal is to have as up-to-date and accurate information as possible. And then I'll just briefly talk about how that system supports the bigger effort to provide coordinated intake system in Minnesota. So as a part of that toll report, 8 organizations in Minnesota got together and wanted to figure out how could we provide like a no wrong door type of entry. And so as a part of that, we now have a statewide phone number that you can call to get legal services. And we have 4 regional legal organizations that screen those calls, both for services at their own organization and at one of the 7 other organizations that are participating. And that database Loon is what is really powering the referrals that organizations make between each other to make sure that they're hopefully accurate referrals. So that, in a very brief nutshell, is our virtual hub in Minnesota.
And at this time, I'm going to turn this over officially to our moderator, Miguel, who is on camera, and let everyone else steal the show. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And hopefully you can hear me. We have a question. Is that a question from Paul?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm curious to hear at a certain point, I'll lay the question out now and maybe you can mull it over and talk to us as a group later on. For Susan, Nora, the great person from Minnesota, and Terry, do you keep any type of statistics, or would you be able to give us a sense of, okay, you have X number of people that have been on your system. Can you quantify what number then get help and are satisfied? If you don't have that, that's totally fine. I don't care. Just curious if it's something you've it's if it's a statistic you looked at. And my second question is, in each of for the same people, particularly in Minnesota, how difficult has it been, or is it even a question that you have to work into some type of conflict of interest database among your partners to make sure you're all have yourselves covered from a conflict of interest perspective? How difficult is that lift, and how essential is that lift to your project? Thank you.
I just want to say that, this is going to be a free flow discussion. So please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions. Some of those questions will come out during our conversation. And then, but please feel free, if anyone wants to jump on that question now, happy to. I know we will talk about analytics and impact throughout our discussion. But if anyone has any just kind of general reactions, please feel free to jump in.
Can I ask a real clarifying question, Paul? Maybe we could all answer in our kind of unique way. You said like did you say like how we measure, in a sense, how many folks are helped? Is that kind of what you're looking for, and how are you defining helped?
Right. So I guess my question is, it sounds like you all have impressive numbers of visitors, and from that pool, do you know if people is it possible to find out if they've resolved their issue, or is it like an abandoned shopping cart on Amazon? Yeah, I can't buy that, but I'm going to keep it in there. I don't know if you can say if there's their equivalent for a person's problem in the shopping cart, but how many happy shoppers do you think you have?
So I can do happy shoppers. I can't tell you if we don't do any, except within certain forms where I do some SMS follow-ups, right? I can't tell you like quantify in terms of, yes, we helped them get that divorce, right? That one maybe I can do. But in terms of, we have 2 surveys on our site. One is a straight binary up down. We get tens of thousands of responses, and then we separate out how people feel about forms, our document assembly versus our legal information. Our document assembly is about a 90% positive rate, so happy customers. And then our legal information is it's actually gone up. It was about 70, but now it's about 80% in terms of happy customers. Everyone that has responded to, have you gotten your divorce? They've been yes, but the sample size is so small because once they file their divorce, Paul, they just forget about you. So in terms of, but the folks that are very kind enough to respond to my SMS survey, they're like, thank you, I got my divorce. So again, but the sample size is so small there, I'm not comfortable. But the other one, we get tens of thousands of responses. And then we have thousands of responses every year on what we call a long form survey, where folks tell us in a much more long form survey, like a scale, right? Like very helpful to so forth. But they actually provide us feedback in terms of, can you do this? Can you add this to your site? We're having difficulty. And so that's kind of some of the statistics that we gather that's very specific to that quote unquote happy customer. And then I know, Jay, there was a really specific question about conflicts.
Yeah, I can speak to the conflicts real quick. So we did work with our Office of Lawyers Professional Responsibility to make sure we were covering those bases. So basically, the screening is simple enough that we're not gathering information that they felt would potentially create a conflict. And if the case is, we all are using legal server. So we can use the legal server e-transfer functionality. And if a case is e-transferred, it's automatically firewalled off so that the rest of the organization can't see it, save for 1 or 2 folks at that org who have access to that section of the site. So it's kind of both of those factors.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you all. I want to take a step back just a little bit. I had definitely the honor and privilege to work with all of your organizations in some capacity vis-a-vis the Tech Fellows program and placements of fellows. But Jay, something that you mentioned and Susan in prior conversations is universal design and community design. I know this project serves two communities, right? It serves the organizations that you partner with and also the communities that you serve. So how could you walk us through how do you kind of coalesce such a large effort to create a project? What does that design experience look like? And anyone can take that if you want to jump in.
I probably have the most, well, Jay, you went through a massive redesign in 2019 as well, right? So I led that community-led design when I was general counsel for the Access to Justice Foundation. So, and we convened really broad base of stakeholders. So legal aid, but all the courts, all the clerks, Supreme Court, because we're not a unified court, by the way, a bunch of social service agency, domestic violence organizations, the Attorney General's office, you name it. If you worked or interacted with low-income, vulnerable, and underserved folks, we wanted you as part of the steering committee. The way that we brought together consensus was we got buy-in early on that we were going to let data and users' needs and not organizational needs lead the effort. So, you know, as I led this effort, we did a ton of data gathering around this to coalesce. And then we did something called a voice of the customer, which is we actually surveyed 800 Ohioans, half of which were low income, about what they wanted, what their needs are, what their design needs were. And we made sure to include folks that didn't have broadband access. We wanted to have a better understanding of that full scope of that picture. And as one of the our steering committee members told me, and they meant this in all seriousness, but they were also saying, I mean this as a compliment, that basically by doing this and by coalescing all these folks, they said, you sucked all the air out of the room. Like they basically said they had almost no choice but to, in a sense, put aside their own like organizational needs and say, yeah, that's what users are saying. No, you're right. That's what they need. And so anytime I'd get a comment, I'd be like, do you remember this thing over here? And so that's how we let everything lead the way that we did. So we had to make some really hard decisions. Everyone has budgets that are like this size, and the needs are, and the wants, I should say, are like this big. So we, you know, always went back to that data. We always let user needs lead, and they were always the center of the design. And that's why when we launched, we were mobile first. And currently over 70% of the folks that come to our site do so via only their mobile phone. So, you know, we had to make some hard decisions. That cost us more to do that, by the way. But when we saw the data, that's the way we went. And so it's kind of some of the stuff that we did.
And I definitely would love to hear, and especially from Terry. I know Aleo has been a leader of like design, right? Very easy to use interface and really intuitive platform for over a decade that I've been using it, even though I'm not an Illinois or Chicagoan. But yeah, if you want to speak on the design aspect.
Yeah, so we have learned as an organization in our 25 years of existence a lot about usability, right? And one of our mantras is we are not our users, right? And that's really important to keep in mind anytime you look at a mock-up, right, or read an article and say, I don't know if it seems like we should title this something else, or it seems like this button should go over here. We're like, nope, it's not our decision to make, and we put it on to a usability hub. We use something called Listna. We test all the time. You can kind of set what kind of audience you want to test your designs. And we've been doing that, I would say, for at least a decade, right? Those kinds of things. I would love to do more of it. I don't think, the more you do, right, the better data you have. But we do the best we can. Something that we have started to do more recently, and this came out of our strategic planning process from 3 or 4 years ago, is the idea of co-designing with community members. And we are doing that. We piloted initially 2, we call them community groups or stakeholder groups. One was focused on older adults in Illinois who were homeowners and what their issues were. And another one was focused on people directly impacted by criminal records. And both of those groups were exceptionally helpful in opening our eyes as to identifying gaps in the information and identifying how the struggle that they have and how the information is organized. And then, even, the older homeowners groups, for example, we didn't even have on our radar like homeowners insurance issues, right? That's a huge problem, right? And we didn't have, we mentioned homeowners insurance like for 2 sentences and like 1 article, but it caused us to look into it a lot more and to create additional resources on that because it was identified as an important problem that people needed education on, right? And so I would say, it's crucial to involve community members in the process from beginning to end and beyond, right? The importance of collecting and responding to feedback and keeping that feedback loop going can't be understated. And the amount of enhancements or even bugs, right, that we have found as a result of feedback from users is, that's our best source, really, of improving our site. And so the more feedback systems you can incorporate, the better, but you have to keep them monitored and you have to be able to respond to them effectively.
Thank you, Terry. And really great bringing up the homeowners insurance. I know here in Philadelphia, we deal with a large tangled title issue, deed fraud, and other issues that really have an effect to low-income homeowners and elderly homeowners. Touching on something that Susan said about the users, the statement that who your real users is, which I absolutely loved. How do you deal, and this is a question I want to throw out to the crowd, how do you deal with the resistance, or I guess pushback from traditional, I guess, organizations, legal organizations that have competing priorities, both from their tech stack and how they have traditionally done things, and when implementing a statewide or regional-wide solution, having to get buy-in on this shared vision that would ultimately have a greater impact on your residents across. So how do you all experience that resistance from other legal organizations, and not just in terms of the development process, but I want to throw this, I guess, first to Nora too, because I know you all are doing some regulatory reform things and thinking about UPL and how implementing a technology solution may cause some hairs to be raised for lawyers thinking about UPL and other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Lawyers can be very territorial, right? And so I think even outside of the regulatory reform, even when we were starting out, people felt very threatened to their practice that we were taking away business and clients away from people. And so it took a lot of time and communication to, really, it's like, if these are people you want to serve them, right? But a lot of people who are turning to Michigan legal help are doing so because they're not able to find an attorney to help them, or they're choosing for whatever reason to navigate without an attorney. So that is a dynamic that has existed since we started, and is something that we're still dealing with. And I think our kind of response to that is, value and mission driven. We are here to better serve people. Is this a better service to people? No. What is this really about, right? And trying to, as tactfully and diplomatically as you can, try to return it to that. Why are we here? Who are we trying to help? I've also seen it come up a bit, and I'm curious if others here on the panel have, where with other legal service providers, kind of getting some requests for like, oh, could you build this or add this to help us in our practice, which is very sympathetic in that legal aid has very high caseloads, but really we're here in the service of people who are not able to get an attorney, and also having to kind of respond to even our partners that we work really closely to make sure that we're really hewing closely to who we're serving and what our mission is, and that's how we're directing our energy.
And I just want to say, like, for us, I think I've had the same experience as everybody else. The bar associations are pretty accepting of us now, right? But there was initial pushback, which now they actually direct folks, because they get clients that they're just like, hey, go to Ohio Legal Help. So, because it's not a practice area. But we have found our biggest allies to be the courts for us. We're a non-unified court system where, again, it's not even 400 plus different types of courts. It's 600 plus judges, a Supreme Court and appellate division, all very diffuse and, let's just say, very unique, right? And so what we have found, our biggest allies is the courts, because they're in a similar situation where they get a lot of pro se folks. They know that for resources reasons, legal aid can't help these folks, right? And so they're looking for a way to help them. So we're helping the same folks. And so we've had courts be our biggest allies and supporters, in terms of the fact that, right now I'm working with a bunch of probate judges, and at first they wanted every form, and I said, no, what we're going to do is focus on the forms that can serve the population that is our target audience. But they bought on, they accepted the model, and they were great at accepting poverty affidavits. So this is where we can interject, right? And say, you know what, we're going to create this thing. We're inserting a poverty affidavit so that they can get a waiver of fees on the summary release. And because we're doing this other big thing for them, they're like, oh, sure, we'll do that. So like, it's a way to both grab an ally and do advocacy on behalf of the folks that you're serving. So, for us, the courts have really been our allies in terms of, because we're trying to address similar issues, but at the same time, as advocates for again, keeping the user at the center, we need to make sure that their needs are met. So we knew that poverty affidavits was potentially an issue. So we said they're going to be included with every package that we do. Yeah.
That kind of leads me into my next question in terms of partnerships. Susan, you just brilliantly described the role of partnerships with your courts, but could others touch on what is the role of partners to your success, and specifically, how do you cultivate those partners over time?
I can speak to some of the partnerships we have with legal aid organizations. In addition to trying to help make sure that their information about what types of help they provide is up to date, we also rely really heavily on our legal aid partners in making sure that our content is accurate and up to date, and that includes some of the types of practical information that you can't find in like case law or in a statute. And so they're really vital for us to having like actionable information on our website. But we struggle every year in getting people to agree to take time out of their very busy caseloads to review and take, often just 5 minutes to review 3 or 4 pages to make sure it's accurate. So we've kind of used every strategy we can think of to cultivate those partnerships. But I think the biggest thing is that we show, and by having a quality product that we're producing, that there's a real value add there. So our legal aid partners use our fact sheets from intake staff, sharing them out with people they can't help, to staff attorneys who include fact sheets, maybe in a closing letter. So by making sure that we have really quality information, I think we get a little more buy-in from just like everyday folks who we're working with to get information updated. And then we've also tried to, in addition to that kind of lateral approach, make sure that we're having legal aid leadership really invested in the projects by continually reminding them about the services that Law Help provides, and making sure that they're sending that message as well, that participating in those types of fact sheet reviews is a really important part of everybody's jobs. So that's just one piece on the legal aid partnership side, but I'm sure there are other partnerships that folks could speak to.
Terry?
Yeah, I'll just mention, because this is the Philadelphia Bar Foundation, you as a funder can pull a lever and put into your grant agreements that people must keep their profiles updated every year, every quarter, whatever it is, in order to comply with the grant, right? One of the things that was really effective for us, and this goes back to what Jay was saying, we have a very symbiotic relationship with our legal aid partners, right? They rely on us, we rely on them. They have the subject matter expertise. They have the practical, to some extent. Legal aid partners are limited in that they don't know what it's like to be a self-represented litigant in court. So there we have to rely more so on court partners or even community partners who aren't legal. But yeah, so they do help us keep our content up to date, and we wouldn't exist without them. And we're a place that they can refer people to, who don't qualify for whatever reason, aren't eligible for services, who only get advice or some other form of brief service.
Thank you. But I know each of your tools and websites were critical during the pandemic when we are all social distancing, we were all virtual. But how are you all thinking about impact during this moment right now? And when I say this moment right now, I'm saying the transition in the president, the cutting of agencies and benefits, austerity on the way, a crisis with immigration enforcement. How are you all thinking about kind of impact as we see the negative consequences kind of looming, and even in the present day approaching from the change in administration?
I mean, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nora.
So I think that is it's a conversation that we're actively having within the program. What we've been like, we really see ourselves as, a library, a resource about people's rights and how to enforce them, right? And so in this time, I think we're trying to protect information. So we have done a lot of archiving of information to make sure, as long as those are still the laws and rights that we have, that even if they've been pulled down from websites, that we have archived information to be able to have that available to folks going forward. We've seen an increase of certain tools and different uses of tools. Because of that, I think most prominently I can think of is we've got a temporary delegation of parental authority that a lot of people are using in the immigration context. And so that we really have, again, with the partnerships, trying to have really close and open relationships with service organizations that are highly impacted right now with their client populations, and trying to figure out how we could be mindful of those different uses and those new uses or different needs to be able to respond to those. And I think another thing that we've been looking at too is if and when probably laws will change and processes change, or there's new requirements for things, kind of thinking about how we communicate. And again, kind of part of the information piece in terms of just being transparent about decisions and changes aren't made in a vacuum, right? They're made by people, and the kind of role and responsibility we have in being able to say, this is from, the Supreme Court made this decision, and that's why this isn't the case, and being able to kind of name and name where changes are coming from, rather than just saying like, oh, suddenly our benefits page is totally different. Well, that didn't exist, didn't kind of come out of nowhere. So we're still kind of trying to catch up and respond and be mindful about what role we can be playing.
Yeah, and I think everything Nora said, but I think part of this thing is, we meet as a team almost daily now. We're all remote, but we meet as a team. We talk about changes. I help the team think through what can we address, what can't we address, because I'm helping them to keep focused on our mission and what we can't do versus going down a spiral, which some of my staff have. So part of this is self-care for my team. And I think that's really important right now, is that understanding that decisions that are being made that may impact some of the almost every population we serve, right? That our mission here is to tell that story in the plainest way that we can, so that we can get the good information, as we always have, to the people that need it. We're obviously doing additional enhancements to our immigration module. I'm sure everybody else has seen, like, I don't know, we saw like a 1,500% increase overnight, right, on some of the pages. And then we're gonna probably stand up an unaccompanied minor enhanced page as well, based upon certain actions right now. So we kind of make those decisions as we go. But some of the things that we haven't done is we haven't updated the right now the vacatur of the Venezuela TPS, because we're not sure if there's going to be a suit. And so there are some things that we just have to say, not right now, because we have an entire humanitarian type of relief page, and where we had parked FRNs and TPS, and not just for Ukraine, but a whole bunch of folks. And when the Venezuela vacatur came, my staff came to me and said, I said, you know what, everybody take a breath. There may be a suit, so we need to just, figure out what we need to do. So part of this is, especially right now, and we have a really small team, there's 6 of us that manage our entire site and platform. So I just said, it's a time for self-care. We can do what we can do. And it's important to have those communications with, especially the content team.
I really appreciate that response, both responses. I want to shift the conversation a little. One thing you mentioned was the enhanced module, and I know everyone on the conversation may not be aware about that in a technical term. So to take a step back, is this and how do you all like streamline intake? Do you all streamline intake on all of these platforms? And how is that, I guess, observed, compared to a traditional intake process? And if Terry, I believe you all have streamlined intake.
We have a probably the most complicated in triage intake and referral system in the country. Part of that is because it involves all of the legal aid programs in the state, and it also acts as an actual triage and intake system, right? So for 13 legal aid organizations in the state, people can actually apply online, and their information gets transferred into the legal server instance of that program. As Jay said, it sits in its own space until a conflict check is run. If it clears, they accept the case. All of the information gets mapped to the appropriate fields. Huge time saver, right? So if this is a big selling point, right, for legal aid, is that we're saving on data entry, right? The data entry is effectively done by the applicant. And the applicant also can figure out, just by answering the triage questions, if they're even eligible for service, right, at any time of day, right? So the other thing that I think our legal aid programs struggle with is, most people are calling on a hotline, and Legal Aid Chicago that serves Cook County, is the largest provider in Cook County, where Chicago is located, has to close their phone line down at 10 a.m., right? It opens at 8:30, and they have to close it at 10 because they don't have any more capacity to answer phones, and to do callbacks. So the extent to which we can create systems that can appropriately screen people, and divert them to other resources or other services, that's really improving the delivery of legal services ecosystem, right, in your state. And just that diversion, if you think about how long does it take someone on the phone, an intake person on the phone, to determine whether somebody's eligible or not, right? And that time can be saved, right, if we can automate some of these processes. And it doesn't have to be online, right? We can create voice systems that do this. We have people can apply via SMS now in Illinois for service, and it works the same way. It's just a different user interface, right? And that's meaningful, especially in those parts of Illinois. Most of Illinois is rural, right? Outside of, a few metropolitan areas, and not everyone has broadband access, but everyone does have SMS. And did I get away from, let's see, what did you ask me, Miguel? I lost track
Well,
of.
you answered it. You answered it about the
Okay.
streamline process. I am curious, just each of your thoughts on AI. I know the technology is rapidly advancing, and in what role, if generative AI is playing a role in updates to your systems, or if this is something that you all have integrated to kind of improve services. Jay, you're shaking your head, so I'll give you.
It's a big topic, yeah. So I'll say present moment. In Minnesota, we're just using AI lightly, mostly with content development, where we'll always have human eyes on it before it reaches the public. But I know there's a group of statewide websites. I think all four of us are involved in that group that are working on creating like a common legal AI model that would be able to apply it in various ways. So the biggest, I guess, most obvious way I see that being a benefit is in these triage systems that we all have, that at least in Minnesota takes many, many, many hours to update every year, because you're really trying to anticipate what are all the different ways that somebody could describe their problem, and how does that map onto the way that lawyers are thinking about the problems and the self-help info and services that are available to match that. And I think generative AI has a lot of potential to do away with all those hours we're spending, and also probably be more responsive to all the different ways that people talk about their legal issues, that we can't anticipate, even with all the user testing in the world that we could try to do. So those are the two things. And then I know Susan has done some really cool stuff with translations too.
Yeah, so we use it for translation and text to speech in multiple languages. With all our Spanish content is fully hand reviewed, but then our other, we kind of follow the all the vital and like tricky things gets an eye and hand review. But we're running 3 prototypes now. All we're not sure if we're going to deploy, but it's part of the statewide cohort. We have we have a prototype that will basically run triage. And it's interesting because we gave it kind of the direction and the structured data and everything else, and it has moved beyond that. And so it's interesting because it's going to take more broad-based inputs and things like that. So we have a triage prototype that's running. We have a narrative prototype that's running, one that I show, and then one we're playing with, if you will. The one that we show that we will probably deploy will rewrite narrative, but doesn't engage in back and forth, doesn't engage in prompting. So if someone writes a paragraph, it will rewrite it in an appropriate format. The user has to accept it. In other words, for a lot of different reasons, the user has to accept it. Then that narrative block gets written into the appropriate document assembly form. And then the last thing that we're running is we're running a prototype. We call it the retriever. It's a retrieval augmented generation against multiple different types of knowledge bases that we're experimenting with. One is our website. So it runs chat really reliably because we've made the scoring in a way that we've been really conservative in what it will return. But then we also have other knowledge bases, like it will retrieve information from manuals. It will like maybe public benefits manuals and things like that. So we're running those 3 prototypes right now. The one that we'll probably deploy right now is the narrative. And then one that we're probably getting close to deploying is AI enhanced search. Yeah, and I know Terry has actually deployed that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to see, we just released Ask AI on illinoislegalaid.org. You can see it in action and play around with it. We did have to keep putting guardrails on it. I mean, large language models do look beyond, you try to limit them as much as you can to the sources, but by their very nature, they're models, right? And they were trained on way more data than you tell it to look at, right? So so you do have to spend some time, I think, putting up the right guardrails and doing a lot of testing, right? But please go out and use our Ask AI and let me know what you think. And if you see anything, especially if you see anything wrong, let me know. Yeah, we have a contact us button form right on the top banner of all the website pages. Feel free to fill it out and give me information. And I'll just say, I think that the biggest win, something that AI large language models do really well is draft, right? And so I think that there's probably going to be a sea change in how we create content, how content is created, and how it's updated, right? Because it does such a great job with that, right? And then the work that we need to focus on is it accurate, right? Is it legally sufficient? It does a great job with plain language too.
Go ahead, Nora.
No, I not much more to contribute. I mean, we use Spot AI as part of our triage. We don't have any other like public facing AI tools right now. Mostly just kind of internal processes. Like Jay, very interested in AI's use with triage. I think we're really trying to think of what is the competitive advantage of AI, right, versus humans. And I think triage systems are hard to keep up to date. They're very complex. We've got a manual logic tree. It's very hard to update and to build upon. And so I think having something like that would be an improvement for the user, right, in terms of how it would be able to better connect people to services and our ability to more efficiently and effectively keep things up to date. We haven't done a chat. We have a staff serves chat service right now where our staff is actually staffing a chat service. And so at this point, we're happy with how that is going. And I think, we're curious to see how some of these AI models develop in terms of kind of seeing that switch. It's interesting. I'm curious what other people on the panel have had. We've had a huge increase in traffic and usage since the new year. There was a bump in November and then a bump now in January in terms of chat traffic, online intakes, traffic to the website. And so that is one of the downsides of human-powered chat services. If you start getting thousands more chats, you only have so many people to staff it. So
I think we've seen a 30% increase in January. And that's not all powered by, we saw it across the board. But to be fair, we always see a 30% increase in January. So we're not sure if it's just, you know what, people stay together
right.
in December for the holidays. And then they all start filing their little divorces in January. And so we see a lot more traffic in January. That has been the consistent pattern over the last 5 years. So 30% is actually normal for us. I don't know about the rest of you.
This exceeds our normal like yearly pattern. Yeah. We usually get like a tax bump, you get the divorce bump, you kind of have those cyclical patterns. But yeah, this kind of exceeds that.
And I guess that brings us to, in terms of measuring impact, how are you all implementing kind of tools or KPIs to see what you are doing? Is that something that is like a dashboard? Is that something that you are reviewing quarterly? What does the measurement process look like? And I know you all mentioned feedback loops earlier, and just kind of distinguish to the audience that the feedback loops are more of a continual improvement process that the user and partners are in, whereas the analytics are more so what measuring the impact of the solution.
So one thing that I'll say, because of our very complex Get Legal Help tool, which is the online triage intake and referral system, and the fact that we use the e-transfer to the legal server instances, we are able to track people who actually apply online, what happened to their case. Did the partner take the case? What level of service did it provide? And we do send out, people can opt in to get an SMS text reminder for their either call back or call the program, right? And the program kind of determines which one it is. And then we send them every, I think 2 or 3 weeks, we send them a prompt that says, hey, did you reach anybody? Did they take your case? And with that data, we're able to then follow up with partners and say, hey, I saw that you didn't take any of these cases, right? We sent you 25 applicants in the last 2 weeks and you didn't take any of them. Maybe we need to tweak your triage rules so that we're getting you better cases, the cases that you want. Let's look at this, right? And so we are able to do that, and we can close that impact loop, at least, right? I think it's difficult when you're talking about legal information, right? And in my opinion, it's crucial to provide information that is free and that people can get to anonymously. One of the things that we've talked about on and off is, well, should we put our information behind a registration wall so that we can get some more information about who's using it, right? But the populations that we are serving have to surrender their private information so frequently to get a benefit that I think it's really important that we provide some level of dignity that enables them to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to give my information. I'm just going to look at this content, right? And take what I want from it. So that was my little soapbox, but I do, measurement is really hard, and when you have anonymous users, it's really hard, right, to circle back. And so being able to do a survey, Susan talked about doing a survey, yearly survey where you can follow back with people and provide incentives for them to participate, which is also important, and find out, if you can just talk to a few dozen people to find out how they're using the site, what did they find? What didn't they find? Right? What would they change? Is really, really, really super helpful.
I think impact is like, I'm used to a quantitative space where you look at impact in different ways, and funders look at impact and look at the outcomes and things like that. That's not something that I can capture on some things, like none of our information requires registration. However, our divorce in Ohio, and I'm talking the simplest one, is divorce without kids, is 27 pages completed, right? Like once you fill in all the information. And so we've simplified that to a plain language guided interview that's like 4 data sets, right? And we just repeat the information throughout. So because of that, and because folks would cry if they lost their information or their data set, we require a very simple registration, which is basically mobile phone, and you don't have to give me your real name, and really it's encrypted. So can I pull it if a user really struggles? Sure, but most of my staff cannot, and our developers really can't. So we can measure impact there in the sense of they will tell me what happened, but I think impact is a really hard thing to actually measure and quantify in a way that, like, my husband, who's a researcher, would say, what are you even measuring there? Like, what's and he ridicules me all the time. It's okay. But so that's why it's a hard thing. I can tell you how many people we serve, which isn't impact, right? I can tell you how many divorce filings we assisted with in Ohio. I don't consider that impact. I consider it helping them, right? So I think, especially for legal information sites, it's a hard thing to measure. Like, even if you get a legal aid to take a case, I still don't know the impact, right? And so that's why I think it's one of those things that's really hard. And folks always want me to publish how much money I've saved people. And I look at it this way. The bar will look at that as all the money they potentially could have made. So like it's a double-edged sword. Plus, I don't even know what that means. And so I think we need to be really careful when we talk about that, because even for legal aid, I think it's hard to measure impact. Yeah.
And for us, we're constantly, because we're paired with legal aid. Well, legal aid can measure outcomes. They can measure if you stayed in your home or whatever. And what I try to talk to people about is that we're in the access business. We're trying to have people get access to legal information, understand that legal information, and then they make the decisions they want to make about what they do with that information. And so it's not going to lend itself to the same kind of metrics that I think other services can get. And the main thing is, like, did you get what you were looking for, and did you understand it, right? And so we have many different surveys that people can access many different ways. We try to answer that question. And we also, in terms of what people aren't talking about feedback loops, what people are not getting, because we have a chat service that we staff, and we also have an email service when that chat service is not available that we staff, we keep track of things that people are asking for that we don't have content on, so we can make sure, like, are there some patterns, are there some things that we're seeing more often that could inform the new content that we're building on the site.
Thank you all. I'm definitely going to stop asking questions and open the floor to our guests and audience. If you all have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or throw your question in the chat. Yeah, thank you all so far for this really great discussion. Brandy, did you want to chime in?
Yes, real quick. So we did have people, as they were registering, sign up with some questions real quick. And it's only one. And I actually wanted to take that moment to ask that question real quick. The question says, any advice on how to tailor your hub for individuals representing themselves pro se?
I think we can probably all answer this question, right?
That was my question. Thank you for asking it.
You're welcome.
I'll start, but I think everyone should probably. I mean, it's a great way to kind of to close. We we always look back at our data in terms of user needs, and these were all folks that would have been represent themselves pro se. We get data from our self-help centers, again, who are representing themselves, like the folks in represent themselves pro se, and then we regularly speak with them, the actual users, and then we speak regularly with all the clerks of courts that have to answer all the questions that self-help folks say. And so because of that, we tailor all the information. But I think part of this is, so, you'll hear plain language, action oriented, keep it to basics of what they need and things like that, right? User testing is critical as part of this. And again, this is going back to the courts. We have found they're a critical part of this, because what I do is I drill down with a whole group of magistrates and I tell them, where do folks struggle? We want folks not only to get the information, I want them to succeed. And they tell me. So part of this was we have kinship guardianship in Ohio, but we call it non-parent custody because it's not the way you do it, but I think it's kinship guardianship in other places. So I talked to a whole bunch of magistrates, rural, urban, and you're thinking like legal issues and things like that. And they're like, they don't serve all the people that they need to serve. If they would just serve all the people that they need to serve, including bio dad, anyone who potentially had custody, then I could hear the case. And so when we realize that, it's kind of like that aha moment, like Terry, you mentioned, right, with homeownership and insurance. We made sure that that information was tailored so that not only did the user get the information that was for self-help, but again, the primary area where the courts identified self-helpers struggle. So if you're going to tailor self-help information, you got to understand the hearing or the tribunal or where they're going to end up, and make sure you get information from them about how do we make sure folks, when they get there, not only do we give them access, but how do we get them to the finish line? And so we're now focusing a lot on getting folks to the finish line. So at least that's where we are in our journey right now.
And I agree, of course, with everything that Susan said, user testing and just talking with your users and the people who are working with your users regularly is essential. One thing slightly different that I was thinking about from when we launched our redesign site in 2019 is we spent a lot of time thinking about kind of the overall structure of our site. And we made the mistake of thinking about that step just within our own staff and with our developers. So we were like, okay, you start on the homepage and then you're going to look for your legal category, right? And all these different pathways. And then like looking at analytics and talking to people later on, that's not how people use most websites. They're going to go to Google. Now they're maybe going to use AI that will pull your website information. So thinking through both in terms of content development and how you're structuring your site. So we want to make sure if somebody is Googling, like, how do I terminate someone's parental rights? And they get to our termination of parental rights page. I know they can't really do that. Then what are the other resources we need to be connecting with them with on that page, because that's where they're landing and that's like their entry into our website. So thinking through that kind of user pathway as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that's crucial, Jay, right? The most used page on our site is a legal resource page, right? It's not the home page. It's not the Get Legal Help tool. It's not, XYZ. It's, they land on this particular issue that they've Googled. And that's really crucial. I just want to put in one plug for observation testing, which is really important it's important to do user testing in terms of asking people, right, and having conversations. But it's also important to actually watch people doing things, because people often think that they need something, and this is true for all of us, right? We say, oh, it would be really nice if we had this thing, right? But then we get that thing and it doesn't really help us, or we don't use it in the way that we thought we would, right? And so it's really crucial, if you can do it, to actually observation test with users. And what that looks like is effectively putting something, in front of someone and saying, okay, here's the scenario. think aloud and tell me what you're thinking about what you should do next, right? And the things that come out of that are amazing, right? In terms of people don't see, you think that there's a button there that's so obvious and people don't see it, right? Or they interpret a phrase completely different than what you thought they would, right? And so observation testing is really, really valuable.
Yeah, and we use something called Hotjar, where we invite folks to do it online. It's all virtual so that no one's prompting them, but you can do survey prompts. We got it for free. I think there must be something with respect to nonprofits, and so that's something for folks to explore. It's like Terry said, you're like, why are they hovering over that thing that they should be clicking, right? And it's driving you crazy, but it's actually really good because they're really anonymous. And then we ask folks in our long survey, are you willing to help us and things like that? You would be surprised how many folks are like, yes, I'd love to do it. And we do offer like a $25 gift card if they complete it. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Well, I definitely want to thank, if we don't have any more questions, I want to thank each of you. Oh, Brandy, I was just going to.
I do. I'm so sorry, Miguel. Real quick, I want to turn back to Terry real quick. She said something interesting when we were talking about partnerships with civil legal service providers. As a funder, Terry, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said as a funder, it could be good to use the actual grants, right? The RFPs, the contract process to kind of write in the EJC and their abilities to support that, right? So I guess my question to you is, A, how would you consider that changing the dynamic between the Philadelphia Bar Foundation's role with the civil legal service providers? And then the second question is, how would you consider rolling that out if we were to consider that to our civil legal service providers, our fundees?
Yeah, so what I think what's been effective in Illinois, and and it's one thing to put it in as a grant requirement, right? That you need to contribute to the statewide website. And it's another thing then to enforce it, right? So, but then you have some leverage, right? You can go back and say, hey, this is really crucial that you participate in this, and it gives you an opportunity to help form what's being developed, and make sure you have some ownership in it, right? Yeah, and so, and in terms of rolling it out, I mean, I think communication is key, right? And I think that the portal, of course, is the primary audience for the portal is the self-represented litigant. It's the person who legal aid cannot serve and the person who is not going to get served from the private bar, right? And that is a huge group of people. And so focusing on that, right, and saying, here's what this portal here's how this portal can help you, right? Partner organization, right? If you're a legal provider, it's a place for you to refer people that you can't serve, right? It's a place if people need additional information and you're only giving them advice that they can go and get more information, right? There's any number of benefits that it provides to people. It's open 24/7, right? You're not. So making a list of if here the important benefits of having a virtual hub, and then presenting that to people. And there's lots of good data out there, right? There's really good research, academic research. Rebecca Sandifer, Jillian Hadfield, right? There's tons of good research out there now about the need, and how more lawyers is not going to solve the problem, right? It's too big. And so we need other things in place.